He laughed when I asked for a raise. It wasn't just any laugh. It was the kind that echoes in your skull long after the sound fades, sharp and humiliating, like you're the punchline of a cruel joke you never agreed to be part of. I'd spent 12 years at Altair Logistics. 12 years designing, refining, building systems that transformed how the company moved freight across the continent. I wasn't just a cog. I was the blueprint. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. I missed birthdays. I missed funerals. I sacrificed quietly, believing that hard work still meant something. That maybe, just maybe, someone would notice. That someone would reward loyalty the way they promised in onboarding brochures and company handbooks. Instead, Jared Maddox, the CEO with the $1 million smile and hollow eyes, leaned back in his leather chair and laughed. A 10% raise? He scoffed, the corners of his mouth curling like he was amused by my audacity. Noah, let's be real. Everyone's replaceable. Even you. Replaceable. The word hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new. I'd heard it before, whispered between cubicles, spoken like a threat dressed as business truth. But this time it was personal, directed at me. After everything I'd built, after every system I'd optimized to save them millions. Replaceable. I stood there, frozen, portfolio of achievements still in my hands. 60 pages of documented success, data, charts, case studies, proof of value, proof of sacrifice. And still, I was nothing more than an expendable line item in a quarterly budget. That was the moment everything changed. Not instantly, not dramatically, but inside, something cracked, something deep. A silence broke, a fire sparked, and from that fire came the decision that would end my 12-year silence and burn down the lie I'd built my career around. This isn't just a story about corporate betrayal. It's a story about what happens when the quiet ones finally speak. When the people you ignored stop playing small. And when the person you thought was replaceable turns out to be the one thing you can't afford to lose. I walked out of Jared's office like a man emerging from a collapsed mine, gasping for clarity, covered in the soot of disillusionment, clutching only the raw remnants of what I once believed in. The glass walls that lined the hallway suddenly felt like mirrors, reflecting back not my success, not my loyalty, not my 12 years of sacrifice, but my invisibility. A ghost in a building I helped construct, now being told I never mattered. The walk back to my cubicle was longer than usual, not because the distance had changed, but because every step was heavier. I passed the offices of managers I had on board, trained, and in some cases, saved from failure by reworking the flawed logistic strategies they inherited. They sat behind polished desks, their names etched in brushed aluminum plaques, sipping espresso and discussing Q3 projections, while I, the architect of the very systems they now controlled, returned to a three-walled box with scuffed panels and a broken keyboard tray. My cubicle sat at the far end of the 5th floor, the quiet part of the building, the part that used to hum with the activity of 15 analysts. Now, there were just 3 of us, not because we'd become inefficient, but because I had made the department so efficient that most of the jobs were deemed unnecessary. I had built automation scripts that predicted delays, rerouted shipments in real time, and optimized warehouse distribution with a level of precision that analysts called scary accurate. And yet, while others got promoted for managing the results, I remained the shadow behind the code. I sank into my chair, the cushion deflated from years of overuse, and stared at the glowing screen. At the top of the inbox, as if fate had a taste for irony, sat the company's glossy newsletter. The subject line, Altair Supply Chain Breakthrough Saves Easton Account. The featured photo? Jared, smiling in a sharp navy suit, shaking hands with Easton CFO. I clicked. The article described revolutionary back-end solutions, innovative real-time routing, and leadership-led transformation. Nowhere did it mention the name Noah Grant. The algorithms, the process maps, the months of debugging and sleepless nights, none of it belonged to me. My fingerprints had been wiped clean from the legacy I built. I minimized the screen and reached into my drawer. There, beneath old expense receipts and half-dried highlighters, was my leather notebook. The pages were soft with age, corners folded and smudged with ink and oil from years of quiet obsession. These pages were mine, dates, diagrams, version histories, late-night breakthroughs scribbled in sleep-deprived handwriting. Some are even labeled, "Not for company use," in big red marker. This notebook wasn't just a journal. It was evidence of ownership, of foresight, of who really built the future Altair was selling. I flipped to a page from 3 years ago, titled Predictive Model Version 2.3, Private Architecture Testing, 11:47 p.m., Home Desktop. There it was, the first iteration of the core system, now powering Altair's most lucrative contract. It was developed entirely on my own time, on my own equipment, and explicitly labeled as such. I hadn't signed any intellectual property agreement beyond the generic employment contract, and that contract clearly limited ownership to work done on company time, using company resources. For years, I let them use my innovations because I believed it was for the greater good, that eventually someone would notice. Someone would recognize my value and reward me accordingly. But now I saw it clearly. They had noticed. They just didn't care. I opened my contacts and scrolled down to a name I hadn't touched in months, Rebecca Liu, VP of Strategy at Titan Freight. She had reached out more than once after hearing whispers about my work. Her last message, sent 6 months ago, was still starred. "Whenever you're ready, we'd love to talk. We value builders here." I stared at it for a long time. 12 years of loyalty clashed with a single moment of clarity. I was angry, but more than that, I was done. My thumb hovered over the call button. For a second, I hesitated, not out of fear, but out of habit. The habit of waiting. The habit of hoping. The habit of shrinking myself to fit into a space that had long since outgrown my purpose. And then I pressed call. The line rang once. Twice. Then came a voice, cool and direct, like someone who already knew what was coming. "Noah," Rebecca said. "This is Noah Grant," I replied, and for the first time in years, my voice didn't tremble. "I think it's time we had that conversation." There was a pause, then a slow smile in her tone. "I was beginning to think you'd never call. You free tonight?" "Where?" "I'll send a car." As I ended the call, I closed the leather notebook and slid it into my bag. Something felt different, not just in my mind, but in my spine. I wasn't just leaving a job. I was preparing for a resurrection. And this time, I would make sure they knew my name. The car Rebecca sent was black, quiet, and smooth, the kind that didn't make a sound when the door closed, as if sealing a pact in silence. As we glided through the Manhattan evening, the city outside buzzed with its usual chaos. Cabs honking at tourists, suited executives speed-walking past food carts, red lights blinking like warnings no one ever really heeded. But inside that car, everything was still. I sat in the leather seat with my hands resting on a leather notebook that held 12 years of work. Work that no longer belonged to Altair Logistics. Work that had never belonged to them in the first place. Rebecca had reserved a corner table at a restaurant so exclusive, it didn't have a sign, just an old iron door and a hostess who knew your name before you said it. The kind of place where reservations had to be made weeks in advance. But for her, one phone call had been enough. It was a subtle demonstration of power, and it wasn't lost on me. I was used to being the one who knew everything behind the curtain, the one who made things work while someone else took the stage. But tonight, I wasn't a backstage technician. I was the show. Rebecca was already seated when I arrived, her dark suit tailored with mathematical precision, a glass of sparkling water in hand, her expression unreadable but not cold. She rose to greet me, not with a handshake, but with a knowing smile. "You finally picked up," she said as we sat her day. "I was starting to wonder if you were a myth." I said, unfolding my napkin. "Altair kept me hidden." She laughed softly, and I noticed her eyes weren't scanning her phone or the room. They were on me. Focused. Present. "I followed your work for years, Noah. Or at least, the work that's been publicly attributed to Jared Maddox and his senior strategy team. But every leap they made, well, it always coincided with a mysterious silence on your LinkedIn. That caught me off guard. You track my LinkedIn? I track talent, she said, sipping her water. And your absence spoke louder than any post. The waiter arrived, and she ordered for both of us. Steak, medium rare. No menus. No deliberation. I didn't even mind. Somehow, she already knew. After he left, she leaned in slightly. Let's get to the point. I want to know what it'll take to bring you to Titan. I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't know. It was that no one had ever asked me what I wanted. Not really. For 12 years, I had reshaped an entire company's infrastructure without once being invited to shape its vision. But here now, the question wasn't if I was good enough. The question was what I required to be treated as I deserved. I want more than money, I said finally. I want authorship. I want my name on what I build. I want the freedom to innovate without a committee of middle managers rubber stamping my ideas 3/4 too late. And I want the kind of position that lets me mentor people who've been overlooked the same way I was. Rebecca didn't blink. Done. I stared at her. Just like that. She smiled. Noah, I'm not here to negotiate your worth. You've already proven it. I'm here to give you the platform to let the world see it, too. Then she paused, set her glass down, and looked me dead in the eye. Now tell me what you've built that Altair doesn't own. That's when I reached into my bag and slid the leather notebook across the table. She opened it carefully, like it was a sacred text, flipping through the pages slowly. Diagrams, predictive models, handwritten timestamps with locations like home, 11:42 p.m., and Saturday, coffee shop Wi-Fi. My signature marked each page. There were algorithms that anticipated delivery bottlenecks weeks in advance, cross-routing systems that made same-day shipping viable without third-party vendors, and load-balancing solutions that no one in the market had even begun to implement. These were all built outside company hours, I said. On my own devices. Altair used them without any formal acquisition process. No contracts. No compensation. Rebecca looked up. That's a legal bombshell. I know. She turned a few more pages. Her expression didn't change, but her posture shifted slightly, like someone adjusting their grip on a weapon they suddenly realized was loaded. This is more than innovation, she said. This is leverage. Dinner arrived, but neither of us touched the food for a while. We just talked about Titan's roadmap, about the flaws she saw in Altair's structure, about people, real people, who got passed over because they didn't shout the loudest in meetings. I told her about Marlene, the customer service lead who held that department together with sheer willpower and outdated tools. About Luis, the junior analyst who had a brilliant mind for pattern recognition, but who never made it past associate level because he didn't fit the executive mold. These were the people I wanted to bring with me. She listened, took mental notes, and nodded. By the end of the evening, she handed me a single sheet of paper folded neatly in half. An offer, triple my current salary, a leadership role reporting directly to her, stock options, autonomy, and most importantly, my name on everything I created. I looked at the number and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in my professional life, someone wasn't asking me to prove my worth. They were matching it. I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice, I said, folding the paper and placing it carefully in my bag. Rebecca leaned back, satisfied. Of course. Let's make sure the next 2 weeks change everything. And they would. Just not in the way anyone at Altair expected. When I stepped into Altair's office the next morning, something in the air had shifted. Maybe it was just me. Maybe after that dinner with Rebecca, after seeing the offer laid bare in front of me, like a mirror reflecting my real worth, I couldn't unsee the truth anymore. The scuffed carpet tiles, the flickering fluorescent lights, the faded motivational posters about teamwork and vision. They didn't inspire anything now except a quiet, biting resentment. I saw through the illusion that this place had ever truly valued me, the illusion that loyalty alone would earn anything more than silence. I had rehearsed how I would hand in my resignation, imagining a confrontation, a moment of vindication where Jared's smug confidence cracked. But reality rarely offers such symmetry. When I walked into his office, he didn't even glance up. Yeah, he muttered, his eyes glued to his dual monitors, fingers typing out some email that probably promised more than it delivered. I placed the letter on his desk, centered just above the Altair-branded mousepad. He looked down, scanned the words. His posture didn't shift, but his tone did. 2 weeks' notice, he said, finally looking up. "Where are you going?" "Titan Freight," I replied, keeping my voice even calm, neutral. Now he snapped to attention. The mask cracked. "Our competitor?" "Yes." He leaned back in his chair, the same one he had been lounging in when he laughed at me days ago. Only now the smugness had drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. And something else, something closer to fear. "We're in final negotiations with Easton," he said, as if reminding me of something I'd forgotten. "I know," I replied. "I built the delivery model that underpins that proposal." He stared at me for a long second, jaw clenched. "We should discuss retention options," he said, voice softening in that faux casual tone executives use when they're pretending you have leverage. "Perhaps that raise you mentioned." "The offer from Titan is triple my salary," I said before he could finish. "It includes a leadership position, stock options, and my name on everything I build." He tried to smile, but it looked like it hurt. "They're overpaying. You'll disappoint them." "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll finally be seen." I turned and walked out before he could respond. There was nothing left to say. The next 2 weeks passed like the final pages of a book I'd read too many times. I trained my replacement, a fresh-faced MIT grad named Connor, polite, nervous, and utterly overwhelmed. He watched me work like I was casting spells, scribbling notes as I broke down systems I'd spent years weaving together with surgical precision. I gave him everything he needed, not out of loyalty to Altair, but because I had no interest in sabotage. I wasn't leaving out of vengeance. I was leaving to become something more than a background function. Still, I took precautions. I backed up every notebook entry, every timestamp file, every archived email where I'd shared personal innovations with the company without formal transfer of ownership. I organized them meticulously, labeling folders with dates and tags. If Altair wanted to come after me, they'd find themselves chasing ghosts wrapped in a fortress of evidence and legal clarity. On my final day, I met with Vance Porter, the company's legal counsel, a man who usually operated like a machine, efficient and dispassionate, now sat behind his desk with a stack of exit paperwork and the unmistakable look of someone dreading what came next. "Standard documents," he said, sliding the forms forward. "Non-compete, confidentiality agreements, affirmation that you're not taking company property." I scanned them, page by page, until I reached the non-compete clause. My pen stopped moving. "I'm not signing this," I said. Vance looked up, blinking. "It's standard procedure. It wasn't in my original employment contract," I said, "and I'm not agreeing to it now." He cleared his throat. "We'd prefer to have this." "I'm not taking anything that belongs to Altair," I interrupted, meeting his gaze. "But I'm taking my personal intellectual property. That was never formally acquired by the company." His brow furrowed. "What personal property?" I opened my bag, removed the notebook, and laid it gently in front of him. As he flipped through it, recognition crept across his face like a slow, dawning storm. "These are the core systems," he muttered. "Yes," I said. He looked up, uncertain. "You built these on your own? At night? On weekends? Off-site? And I have the documentation to prove it." Vance said nothing for a long time. Then he leaned back and exhaled. "I need to make some calls." "Do that," I said, standing. "But my employment ends today, and my work, my personal work, goes with me." At 5:17 p.m., I stepped out of Altair's headquarters for the last time. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft hiss. No fanfare, no farewell cake, no goodbyes from Jared or the executive team. Just the steady hum of a city that didn't care who you were yesterday, only what you dared to become tomorrow. By Monday morning, I was standing in the sunlight of my new corner office at Titan Freight. Not a cubicle, not a seat near the copier. An office. My name on the door. My name on the projects. And a team. 5 engineers waited for me. All of them curious. All of them hungry. All of them watching to see if the stories were true. If the man who'd rewritten Altair's backbone in the shadows could now lead from the front. I looked at them, smiled, and opened my laptop. "Let's build something they'll never forget," I said. And we did. The first 6 weeks at Titan Freight passed in a blur of momentum, caffeine, and creation. I wasn't adjusting. I was unleashing. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't have to squeeze innovation through layers of bureaucracy or translate vision into office politics. I was given a team, a budget, and a green light. No steering committees, no approval bottlenecks, just execution. Pure, focused, undiluted execution. My office overlooked the Hudson River, an ever-moving stretch of current that felt like a metaphor for everything I now stood for. I spent my mornings at the whiteboard with my team, mapping ideas that had been sitting dormant in my notebooks for years, and my evenings refining those ideas into functioning prototypes. We worked like musicians in sync. One person sketching a solution, another testing it, a third pushing it into production before the ink had dried. There was no ego, just energy, and that energy caught fire. We rolled out the first phase of my logistics model by the start of the 7th week. Within days, Titan's delivery times dropped by 30%. Their operating costs slid down by nearly 25%. It was the kind of leap companies dream about, but rarely pull off without risking everything. And yet, we had done it with precision. The system didn't just work, it sang. Titan's sales team didn't waste a second. Armed with performance data and a new narrative, they marched into Easton's boardroom and laid everything out. The numbers weren't just better, they were impossible to ignore. Titan could now do what Altair promised, faster and cheaper, and with proven reliability. By the following Monday, the announcement dropped like a thunderclap across the logistics industry. Easton cuts ties with Altair Logistics, signs multi-year deal with Titan Freight. I was in the middle of presenting our next phase implementation plan when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and froze. Caller ID, Jared Maddox. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, another call, then another. The man who laughed in my face just weeks earlier was now frantically trying to reach me. The 4th time, he left a message. I didn't need to listen to the whole thing. Just the beginning said enough. Noah, this is Jared. We need to talk. Altair is prepared to offer a consulting package, substantial compensation, equity options. Just call me back. I didn't. But 2 days later, I found him waiting by my car in Titan's parking garage. The sight of him standing there, once the towering symbol of my containment, now diminished and sweating in a suit too stiff for the tension he carried, was almost surreal. His voice cracked as he stepped forward. You've put 300 jobs at risk, he said, low and urgent. Altair is facing a full-blown crisis because of what you took. I kept my distance. I didn't take anything that belonged to Altair, I said, calm and unwavering. I took my personal intellectual property, the same property your legal department never acquired. You laughed when I asked for a raise. Now you want to negotiate. His eyes darted, searching for something. Reason, leverage, maybe guilt. This looks like corporate theft, Noah. Espionage. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened a folder marked IP evidence. I tapped a few times and turned the screen toward him. Every page, I said. Every date, every model, every email where I offered to formalize a transfer and you ignored it. You don't have a case. He stepped closer, desperation pulsing through his body like a heartbeat. Name your price, he said finally. Whatever Titan is paying, we'll double it. I paused, and in that moment, I realized I no longer needed revenge. I had transcended it. I'd become everything he told me I'd never be: visible, valued, free. You once told me everyone's replaceable, I said. Even me. I'm just following your advice. His mouth opened, but no words came. Just the sound of the parking garage, distant footsteps, a soft hum of car engines, and the hollow silence of a man who'd finally understood the cost of arrogance. That quarter, Altair's stock dropped 62%. Layoffs followed. First 50, then 200 more. Analysts labeled it a catastrophic loss of institutional knowledge. Internal systems began to fail. Their so-called revolutionary supply chain platform fractured without its architect to hold it together. I watched it all from my office window. Not gleefully, not spitefully, but with a sense of inevitability. You don't build a company on the backs of invisible people and expect it to hold when those people decide to walk away. And then came a lawsuit. Altair filed for theft of intellectual property. The headlines flared. My inbox exploded. Titan's legal team responded with force. We went to court, and every piece of documentation I had kept, every late-night note, every unsent offer to formalize my IP was presented. Emails from Jared himself, dismissing the need for contracts with statements like, "Just build it. We'll figure out later," became the smoking gun. The judge ruled in our favor. Altire's case collapsed. In his final remarks, the judge noted Altire's failure to secure ownership, calling their behavior a gross mismanagement of intellectual assets. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. I didn't stop. I didn't smile. Because none of this was about fame or vindication. It was about truth, about reclaiming the power I had given away too freely, about showing that value isn't something handed to you. It's something you protect. And most of all, it was about making sure that the next time someone like me builds the foundation of a company, they'll never again be asked to accept invisibility as the cost of employment. I didn't destroy Altire. They did that the day they laughed at the man holding up their entire machine. I just stopped pretending I couldn't hear it. In the weeks that followed the lawsuit's dismissal, I began to understand something I hadn't anticipated when this all began. Winning doesn't always feel like triumph. At least, not the way I had imagined it in my quietest, most desperate moments back at Altire, hunched over my desk long after everyone else had gone home, believing that one day someone would finally see me. I had envisioned that when I won, it would feel like rising out of the shadows into light so blinding I would never again question my place in the world. That justice, once served, would taste sweet, final, and pure. But the reality was messy, eh? Yes, Titan was surging. The industry hailed us as the new standard. New clients arrived in waves. Contracts we used to fight tooth and nail for were now being offered without negotiation. Analysts praised our systems, calling them the most efficient logistics framework since Amazon's early infrastructure years. My name was cited in interviews, quoted in case studies requested by tech journals. Titan's board expanded our division, doubling my team, approving every budget proposal without pushback. I had never been more professionally free, more resourced, more respected. But even as I sat in my sleek new office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, with the kind of view that once belonged only to men like Jared Maddox, I couldn't ignore what the shadows behind that glass revealed. It started with a message from Marlene. She had been head of customer service at Altire for nearly 2 decades, longer than me. We weren't close, but we had shared enough awkward elevator rides and late Friday hallway nods that I respected her quiet resilience. She emailed me the day after the news broke that Altire's board was forcing another 150 layoffs. Subject line, I just needed to ask. The body of the message was simple. I lost my job yesterday. So did everyone in my department. People are saying it's because of you, that you destroyed the company. I just needed to know, was it worth it? I didn't answer right away. I stared at that line. Was it worth it? For what felt like an hour. I closed the email. I reopened it. I drafted replies and deleted them. Because how do you explain to someone who just lost their livelihood that your fight wasn't meant to cause their suffering? The next day, she came in person. I was preparing for a board strategy session when my assistant buzzed me. There's someone here. She says her name is Marlene. She worked at Altire. I stood so fast my chair hit the wall. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller. Like she had shrunk in the months since I last saw her moving through Altire's carpeted maze of middle management. She clutched her purse with white-knuckled tension as I brought her into my office and offered her coffee, water, anything to soften the awkwardness. She declined everything, sat still, looked around my office slowly. I just wanted to see, she said finally, to see if it was worth it. Whatever you got in the end. There was again the question. The guilt masquerading as curiosity. I told her the truth, that I hadn't planned it to unfold the way it did, that my intention had never been to burn Altire to the ground, only to stop being invisible inside it, that the company had collapsed, not because I left, but because they were never built to withstand losing someone like me, because they were never built to value people like her in the first place. She looked at me with tired eyes. We all want to be seen, Noah. Some of us just can't take an entire company down when we're not. After she left, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Or the others, people who hadn't made decisions, but were paying the consequences anyway. The silent soldiers of broken leadership. The ones who stayed, not because they were complacent, but because they didn't have the freedom to leave. That night, I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank spreadsheet. I titled it, Operation Reclaim. I began listing every person I had worked with at Altair who had lost their job. I searched LinkedIn profiles, archived old company directories, cross-referenced names with layoffs. By the time I stopped, it was past 2 a.m. I had 173 names on the list. The next morning, I walked into Rebecca Liu's office. "We need to talk about the people left behind," I said. She didn't argue. She didn't ask if it was necessary or profitable. She simply looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Tell me what you're thinking." I proposed a formal initiative. Titan would reach out to every qualified former Altair employee. We'd offer interviews, placement help, training programs. For those nearing retirement or transitioning careers, we'd provide part-time consulting options. For the rest, we'd use our resources to fund certifications, resume coaching, placement assistance. "It's not just charity," I said. "It's an investment in our reputation, our culture, and our future talent pool." "Draft it," she said. "I'll take it to the board." Within a month, we launched Operation Reclaim. We hired 61 people in the first 3 weeks. By the end of the quarter, 112. Some are people I had once passed in Altair's corridors without a second glance. Others, like Marlene, returned in part-time roles that brought them peace, not pressure. We even brought in Jason, Altair's former operations manager, as a consultant. Though it took weeks of silence and a carefully written email that acknowledged the past without apologizing for it. Not everyone accepted. Not everyone forgave. Some sent angry messages. One, Patrice from accounting, replied with just 5 words. "Loyalty means more than paychecks." I filed it in a folder labeled Consequences. Because not all wounds heal with justice. Not all losses are erased by success. But still, I kept building. Because real leadership isn't just winning. It's what you do after the victory. It's who you bring with you. And who you make space for when no one else did. It was a gray Thursday morning in late October when I received an unexpected email from Vance Layton, Altair's former head of legal, and one of the few people at that company who had ever spoken to me with anything resembling professional courtesy. The subject line was simple. "Coffee? There's something you should know." I stared at it for a long moment, debating whether the past still held anything I needed. I had closed the chapter. I had moved on. And yet, there was something in the tone, low-key, measured, and unervingly vague, that stirred a familiar curiosity like the distant echo of a door you thought you'd locked long ago. We met at a small cafe in Midtown, halfway between my new office at Titan and whatever remained of Altair's dwindling legal department. He looked thinner, grayer. He wore a coat that didn't quite fit, and his eyes had lost that litigator shine, the kind that used to carry unspoken confidence built from corporate immunity. Now he looked like a man who'd read the final pages of a book and wished he could rewrite the middle. "I was let go last month," he said, skipping pleasantries. "Part of the final wave. There wasn't much left to salvage." I nodded, not sure what to say. "I'm sorry," was all I could manage. He gave a weak smile. "I'm not. Not really. But that's not why I wanted to talk." He pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and laid it flat between us. He didn't slide it forward. He didn't open it. He just rested his hand on it like it was a confession. "After your exit interview," he began, "when you told us about the personal projects, the notebook, the lack of formal acquisition, I went straight to Jared. I said nothing, just watched the lines around his mouth deepen as he spoke. I told him we needed to investigate your claim, take it seriously, consider settlement options before it got ugly. You were polite. You had documentation. It was clear you had a case." He paused, then tapped the envelope. He showed me this. 3 emails from 3 years ago. You sent them. You offered to formally transfer ownership of certain algorithms. You outlined the terms, reasonable ones. You even asked if Altair wanted to pursue acquisition. Jared replied, each time dismissively, "Just build it. We'll sort it out later." That kind of thing. My throat went dry. I remembered vaguely, now that he said it. I had been so eager to share ideas back then, so naive about corporate structure, thinking that offering it up would demonstrate initiative, not make me vulnerable. Vance opened the envelope and pulled out a copy of the emails, sliding them across the table. There they were. My name, my words, the proof, and Jared's replies, so casual, so arrogant, that they now read like a signed confession. He knew, I said quietly. Vance nodded. He knew everything, that you developed them on your own time, that they weren't protected by your contract, that we had no IP claim. When you left and Titan started rolling out your systems, he panicked, demanded we sue. I told him he had no legal ground. Showed him these. He ordered me to proceed anyway. I sat back, stunned, not by the betrayal, because I had long since accepted Jared's capacity for moral bankruptcy, but by the clarity of it, by how plainly, how deliberately he had chosen to burn everything to the ground rather than admit he was wrong. I should have said no, Vance continued. I should have refused to file, but I had a family, a mortgage, a reputation. I told myself I was just doing my job. That's what everyone tells themselves, I said. He looked away, shame creeping up his neck like a slow tide. I just wanted you to know it wasn't about you. Not really. Jared would have thrown anyone under the bus. You were just the one who built the bus. We sat in silence for a while. The city moved around us, cars honking, phones buzzing, people rushing to appointments that probably mattered less than they thought. Eventually, Vance stood. I don't know what comes next, he said, but I figured you deserved to know the full story. I stood too. Thanks, Vance. He hesitated, then added, you were right to leave. Altair never deserved what you gave them. I watched him disappear into the crowd, the envelope still resting in front of me. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights flickering across the windows, the emails spread out on the kitchen table like old war letters. I thought about the person I had been when I sent those messages, hopeful, diligent, loyal to a fault. A man who believed that value would rise on its own, without needing to be claimed. A man who thought fairness was inevitable if you just worked hard enough. That man no longer existed. In his place was someone who understood the machinery of recognition, who knew the weight of silence and the cost of playing small. Someone who had learned, painfully but permanently, that no one will protect what you create unless you protect it first. Later that week, Jared called again. I didn't pick up. Instead, I walked to the edge of the Titan rooftop with Rebecca during a late-night team celebration. We looked out over the skyline, glasses in hand. You seem heavy tonight, she said. Not heavy, I replied. Just clearer. She didn't press. She never did. That's what I respected about her. She knew that some wars leave echoes long after the fighting is done. Do you ever think we're the villains in someone else's story? I asked, half joking. All the time, she said. The question is, do we build something better because of it, or in spite of it? I looked down at the city below. The hum of progress, the glow of second chances, the quiet beat of lives rebuilding. I'm trying to do both, I said, and I meant it. It was raining the morning Altair officially filed for Chapter 11. The kind of cold, steady rain that blanketed the city like a warning, soaking suits and briefcases, silencing sirens under its quiet roar. I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the world blur behind the glass, and despite everything I had seen coming, every analyst forecast, every whispered rumor, every panic message from former colleagues, I still felt something collapse inside me when I read the headline. Altair Logistics seeks bankruptcy protection amid operational collapse and client exodus. Just like that. 12 years of my life, 12 years of early mornings and late nights, meetings that went nowhere, emails sent into black holes, loyalty repaid with silence. It had all been reduced to a headline, a ticker on a finance app, a casualty of arrogance. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Jared. Not an email, not a voicemail, a live call. I didn't send it a voicemail right away, and I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. Maybe I just wanted to hear what a fallen king sounds like when he has no more kingdom. I answered on the third ring. There was a pause, a breath. Then his voice, lower, thinner, stripped of that slick, performative tone I had come to resent. I'm calling to apologize, he said. I didn't respond. Not right away. I waited, let the silence press against him, force him to fill it with something more than token regret. I knew about the emails, he continued. The ones where you offer to transfer your IP. I knew you documented everything. I knew we never secured anything formally. But I thought, he trailed off. You thought I'd never leave. I finished for him. You thought I was too loyal. Yeah, he said. I did. I misjudged you. I misjudged everything. The confession didn't land the way I thought it might. It didn't feel victorious or vindicating. It just felt late. A diagnosis given after the damage was irreversible. The board removed me yesterday, he added. The bankruptcy filing goes public today. I said, my tone flat. That's why I'm calling, he continued. There's a final board meeting tomorrow. We're deciding severance packages for the remaining employees. I want to recommend Titan's Operation Reclaim as an offboarding resource. If you'd allow it. I blinked. Of all the things I expected, defensiveness, deflection, maybe one last desperate pitch for partnership. I didn't expect humility. You want to send the remaining Altair employees to Titan? I asked. I want them to have jobs, Jared said quietly. Pride doesn't matter anymore. Not when you've burned everything down. I didn't give him an answer then. I said I'd consider it and ended the call. And then I stood in my apartment, watching the rain, remembering the cubicle I once sat in like a cell, the notebook I clutched like a life raft, the man who laughed in my face and now couldn't look his reflection in the eye. The next morning, Altair's press release confirmed everything. Their client list had shrunk by more than half. Systems had failed. Internal audits revealed a complete breakdown of their logistics backbone. The very algorithms I had once built and now carried with me like scars that had become armor. That afternoon, Titan's sales team couldn't answer calls fast enough. Easton's expansion contract was approved. 3 more former Altair clients moved over within a week. Rebecca called an emergency leadership meeting. We need to scale up, she said, pacing in front of the whiteboard. Our projections didn't account for this level of influx. Noah, your Reclaim initiative? It's now our top priority. We expanded our hiring pipeline, doubled our onboarding team, added 2 new regional hubs. Within 4 weeks, Titan had brought on 173 former Altair employees. My department grew from 5 to 40. Some of the new faces were familiar, people who used to pass me in hallways at Altair without ever knowing my name. Now they call me boss. Marlene came back first, Chief Customer Experience Officer now. Jason followed, our operations consultant, reluctantly at first, until the structure and clarity of Titan softened the bitterness he carried. Even Vance eventually joined, helping navigate the legal landscape as we scaled faster than anyone anticipated. 1 year after I walked out of Altair's glass tower, I stood on a stage at the Industry Innovation Awards, the lights hot on my shoulders, the audience filled with executives, reporters, and former colleagues. Some now wore Titan badges. Others sat anonymously, watching the man they once overlooked speak into a microphone that amplified more than just sound. Innovation, I said, isn't just about systems and efficiency. It's about people. It's about recognizing value before it becomes a crisis. It's about never making someone feel replaceable when they're the reason your company runs. The applause came in waves, but I barely heard it. My eyes scanned the crowd until I saw her. Tessa, one of our junior developers, standing near the exit, clutching a folder, eyes wide like I once was wondering where she fit in all of this. Afterward, she approached me hesitantly. Mr. Grant, she said, voice soft, I just started last month. I wanted to ask, how did you know when to finally stand up for yourself? I smiled. It was a question I had carried for years and only recently found the answer to. When staying silent cost more than speaking up, I said, don't wait as long as I did. She nodded, eyes shimmering. Later that evening, alone in my office, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a framed copy of the Wall Street Journal article chronicling Altair's collapse and Titan's rise. Attached was a single note, unsigned but unmistakable. You were never replaceable. I was. JM. I hung it on my wall, not out of pride, but as a reminder. That value is never determined by a title, a salary, or a corner office. Value begins the moment you recognize your own. and that no matter how late it comes, the truth has a voice. Even if it starts as just a whisper in the rain. There's something about standing in a place you help create that changes how you breathe. The air feels thicker, charged, not just with pride, but with responsibility. Every choice you make echoes through people's lives in ways you never fully realize until someone walks into your office, closes the door behind them, and says, "I need to talk." That moment came 2 months after the Innovation Award ceremony, when I found myself buried under timelines for our third expansion hub and new implementation requests from 5 Fortune 500 clients. I was living in momentum. Every day, more companies wanted Titan's infrastructure. Every week, another hiring wave flooded our HR pipeline. And then Tessa, the same junior engineer who had asked me at the gala how to stand up for herself, stood in my doorway again, this time not with curiosity, but with something tighter behind her eyes. Frustration, maybe even fear. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course," I said, setting down the report I'd been reviewing. She sat across from me, folded her hands in her lap, and looked down at them for a long time before speaking. "I submitted a concept for routing optimization 2 weeks ago. I outlined a new model using adaptive AI logic. My supervisor approved it for testing, but yesterday I saw the system being piloted and someone else's name was on it." That sentence hit harder than she knew. I leaned back slowly. "Whose name?" She told me. "Mid-level manager. Solid, but not a builder. Someone good at positioning, at attaching himself to successful ideas like a remora to a shark." I'd seen that behavior before. Hell, I'd lived through it. And now, it had found its way into Titan, the company I swore would be different. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," she added quickly. I didn't know who else to go to." "No," I said, my voice firmer than expected. "You came to exactly the right person." That night, I stayed late. I pulled every record from our internal system. Submission logs, timestamps, approval chains. Tessa's original model was there, with detailed notations, simulation results, and clear authorship. The manager in question had approved it, and 3 days later, submitted an identical version with his name attached. It was a classic move. Sleek, strategic, and infuriatingly familiar. I brought it to Rebecca the next morning. She didn't say anything at first, just scanned the data. Her jaw tightened as she read. "This feels like Altair déjà vu," she finally muttered. "Exactly," I said. "And if we don't handle it differently, we become the thing we swore to replace." Within 24 hours, we reattributed the work to Tessa publicly. We updated the internal system, issued an announcement to the entire engineering division, and privately reprimanded the manager responsible. He was reassigned, not fired, but moved into a role where his influence would be measured and his access narrowed. The message was clear: we build here, but we don't steal. Tessa didn't say much when I told her, just nodded once, visibly relieved, though I could still see the caution in her eyes. The kind that doesn't go away just because you've been heard. It lingers, waiting to see if it's safe to believe again. Later that week, as I walked the floor of our newest operations center, watching engineers collaborate, analysts brainstorm, and managers actually listen, I realized we were at a tipping point. Titan was no longer just growing, we were scaling. And scale, if left unchecked, invites the same rot that hollowed out Altair from the inside. Not through bad code or failed deliveries, but through neglect, through the failure to defend the culture we promised. So I made a decision. We established something called the Builders Pact, a formal, signed statement by every Titan manager and team lead, written not in legalese, but in plain language. It promised transparency, attribution, mentorship. It guaranteed that if you built something, your name would follow it. And more importantly, it required leaders to defend the people under them, not out of fear of policy, but out of commitment to principle. We introduced it with a company-wide town hall. I stood at the front of the auditorium, the same place where a year ago I'd only dreamed of addressing people as anything more than a ghost in the back row. "I've built systems," I said, "but they're worthless without the people who imagine them, test them, refine them. And too often in this industry, those people get erased. Not here, not anymore. It wasn't a standing ovation kind of moment. It was quieter than that, deeper. It settled into people's posture. You could feel it in the nods, in the way eyes lifted, in the silence that meant people were taking it seriously. Weeks passed. The pact held. Promotion slowed down, not because we stopped advancing people, but because the process became more rigorous, based on contribution, not connections. People grumbled at first, but soon something shifted. More ideas came from lower levels. Junior staff volunteered insights more freely. We had fewer meetings and more breakthroughs. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized something. The real revenge wasn't just watching Altair fall. It wasn't the headline or the courtroom or even Jared's late-night call. It was this, standing in the very culture I never got to experience and making sure others did. One night, I stayed late again, just like the old days, walking the empty rows of workstations. I passed desks filled with hand-sketched diagrams, whiteboards full of experiments, coffee mugs with inside jokes I didn't understand. It was messy, vibrant, alive. A few lights were still on in the programming wing. Tessa was there, headphones on, coding in deep focus. I didn't disturb her. I just watched for a moment, remembering who I used to be and realizing that she didn't have to become him to succeed. That was the win. Not a corner office, not a title, but the chance to build what should have existed all along, and to make damn sure it stays standing. The funny thing about becoming visible, about finally stepping out of the shadows where you spent years doing the heavy lifting, is that people begin to see you through a new lens, but that lens comes with weight. It doesn't just magnify your wins, it also sharpens your flaws, your hesitations, your missteps. The light feels good until it burns. It started with an internal audit meeting, the kind that should have been routine. Titan had grown so fast over the past 6 months. 3 new hubs, a 45% jump in clients, and more than 300 new hires that we'd started tripping over our own success. Not in the obvious ways. Orders were still shipping on time. Clients were happy. But internally, cracks were forming, the kind that only people who'd been through collapse before could recognize. I saw them first in the tension between departments. Operations accused engineering of overpromising. Engineering blamed sales for underestimating scope. HR struggled to onboard people fast enough, while procurement scrambled to keep up with demands. And every issue, every disagreement, eventually landed on my desk. That's when Rebecca called me into her office. "Noah," she said, folding her hands in front of her, "you've built a phenomenal system. You've proven your value 10 times over. But we're at the stage now where systems aren't enough. We need leaders who can scale with the company, who can unify, not just innovate." I stared at her, feeling a slow tension knot in my stomach. "Are you saying I'm not doing that?" "I'm saying the role is changing," she replied carefully. "And you need to decide if you're going to evolve with it, or if you're still carrying too much of what happened at Altair." That stung more than I wanted to admit, because deep down, I knew she wasn't wrong. I had been leading like a builder, hands-on, precise, detail-obsessed. But in doing so, I had become a bottleneck. Every decision came through me. Every escalation, every exception. I had built Titan's new logistics brain, but I hadn't trusted anyone else to touch the wires. I was still protecting it like it could be taken from me again. And in doing that, I had created exactly what I swore I wouldn't, a single point of failure. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stopped. I canceled meetings, blocked out 2 full days. I walked through every department, not as a VP, not as a systems architect, but just as a listener. I sat in on customer support calls. I watched junior analysts work through routing problems. I joined a warehouse team for a morning shift, helping scan and sort crates, feeling the rhythm of the ground floor again. What I saw was humbling. People weren't just working hard. They were holding the walls up, improvising solutions where processes hadn't caught up, covering for inefficiencies, compensating for my silence. That evening, I stayed late again, not because I had something urgent to finish, but because I needed to sit with everything I'd seen. I walked the halls of Titan's headquarters in near darkness, pausing at the glass walls of our product lab, the same one where my team had first rebuilt the predictive algorithm that launched our rise. The whiteboards were still covered in sketches, the air faintly humming with after-hours servers. But something had shifted. This was no longer my company. It was ours. The next day, I called a full leadership meeting. No slides, no data, just a story. I told them about the cracks I'd seen forming, about the weight we were placing on speed over structure, about the way I had failed to empower them to lead without my permission. I told them I had been leading from fear, that some part of me still believed that the second I stepped back, the recognition would vanish, that I'd be erased again. But Titan wasn't Altair, and I wasn't invisible anymore. We made immediate changes. Decision-making authority was redistributed. I created a builder advisory council made up of contributors from every level of the company. Not managers, doers. People who wrote the code, handled the shipments, solved the fires no one saw coming. Their job wasn't to report. It was to advise, to challenge, to hold me accountable. We also launched the Clarity Framework, a living document that outlined every major system, every interdependency, and who owned what. We opened it to the whole company. Transparency was no longer an ideal. It was infrastructure. But change, even when it's right, invites pushback. A few senior hires, people who had come from legacy companies and expected control to flow upward, balked. One even resigned, citing philosophical differences with the leadership model. I didn't fight it. If clarity made them uncomfortable, they were in the wrong place. And yet, as we rolled out these changes, something remarkable happened. Productivity spiked, not from pressure, but from trust. People felt ownership. They proposed improvements before being asked. Junior developers took on initiatives that had once been manager-only. And the fractures between departments? They didn't disappear, but they began to heal. Slowly. Honestly. Tessa, now leading a cross-functional development team, said it best during a strategy session. Everyone's talking like we're just a logistics company, she said, pointing to the screen. But what we're really building is proof. Proof that a company can scale without stepping on the people who built it. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words ripple through the room like a current. Because that was the cost of becoming visible, the responsibility to stay that way. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who once sat where you did, wondering if anyone would ever see them. And now, it was my job to make sure they were. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. Meetings on the calendar, dashboards to review, a client pitch scheduled for later in the day. But the moment I stepped into the office, I knew something was different. The receptionist's voice in my ear carried a hesitation that I hadn't heard in months. "There's someone here to see you." She says she worked at Altair. Those words alone pull me back into a version of myself I thought I'd shed. I walked toward the lobby with the strange anticipation of a reckoning. And there she was, Marlene. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year, but her presence still carried weight. She stood with her purse clutched tightly in front of her chest, eyes fixed on the floor like she was trying to stay grounded in a building that wasn't hers. "Marlene," I said softly. She looked up, her expression unreadable, somewhere between pride and hurt, between defiance and collapse. "I thought maybe we could talk," she said. I brought her into my office, offered her coffee or water, anything to slow the pace of what I felt coming. She declined both, sat down slowly in the leather chair across from me, and took a long breath before speaking. "I lost my job last week," she said plainly, "along with everyone in my department. 37 people. The number sat between us like a cinder block. I didn't speak. I didn't know how to. They're saying it's because of you," she added. "That you took the systems, the clients, the people, and left the rest of us to sink." I opened my mouth to explain, to defend, to outline every detail, the legal documents, the offers I had made, the late-night emails where I begged Altair to value what they had before I ever walked out the door. But none of that mattered in this moment. Not to her. Not to someone who'd spent 15 years holding up a department no one ever truly saw. "I didn't steal anything," I said. "Everything I took was mine, built on my own time with my own tools. I try to do it the right way." She listened, quiet, still. "And the people who lost their jobs?" she asked. "The ones who weren't part of your war, but got caught in the crossfire?" That question, it pierced something I'd been pushing down for months. The guilt I didn't want to name. The collateral damage that shadowed every headline about Titan's rise and Altire's fall. I've been working to fix that, I said. We've hired over 100 former Altire employees. We're still hiring. We've created training programs, mentorship tracks. She interrupted me, not with anger, but with something harder to confront. I didn't come here for a job, no. I blinked. Then why? She looked around my office. At the nameplate on the desk. At the window view of the city she used to work in from a cubicle without daylight. I came to see if it was worth it, she said. If all of this, your corner office, your press coverage, your team, was worth what happened to the rest of us. The air felt thick. My throat tightened. And for the first time since I walked out of Altire, I didn't have an answer. I thought about every late night building code, every meeting where I was ignored, every time Jared laughed while I stayed silent. I thought about the employees who'd found new beginnings here, about the systems we rebuilt better than before. But I also thought about the ones who didn't land on their feet, the ones who weren't called back, the ones who blamed me, quietly or openly, for choosing myself after years of choosing the company. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, I said. I just wanted what I earned. We all want that, she replied, rising from her chair. Some of us just don't have the leverage to take down a company when we don't get it. And with that, she left. She didn't slam the door. She didn't cry. She just walked out as quietly as she had entered, leaving behind a question I couldn't stop replaying. Was it worth it? That evening, I sat alone in my office, the city darkening beyond the glass. My phone buzzed with a message from Rebecca. Our quarterly earnings had exceeded projections by 18%. The company was flying. The industry was watching. But I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet. In the first column, I wrote names, people from Altire I remembered. People who had lost jobs, not because they failed, but because someone else had failed to see their worth in time. I cross-checked LinkedIn, built a profile for each one, skills, experience, current status. By midnight, I had 212 entries and a new mission, because success built alone is just a monument. But success built together, especially with those once left behind, that's the beginning of something lasting. The next morning, I didn't wait for a meeting slot. I walked straight into Rebecca Liu's office with the kind of clarity that doesn't come from strategy sessions or spreadsheets. It comes from guilt sharpened into purpose. She looked up from her monitor, a brow already raised. I take it this isn't about client metrics? I placed the printed spreadsheet on her desk. 212 names. Every one of them someone who used to be part of Altire. Every one of them displaced by the collapse I had helped accelerate. Not through malice, not by design, but through a kind of momentum that didn't leave room for grace. What am I looking at? She asked, scanning the first few lines. Former Altire employees, I said. People who lost their jobs in the fallout. Some we've hired. Most we haven't. She kept flipping through, silent, until she reached the bottom. This is thorough, she said. I want to build a formal initiative. I continued, stepping forward, my voice steady. We interview every qualified former Altire staff member. We create a training bridge for those whose skills need updating. We offer consulting roles to those nearing retirement. And for the ones we can't bring in directly, we connect them to companies in our network and pay for their placement support. Rebecca leaned back, her expression unreadable for a moment. That's a big ask, she said. Expensive, time-consuming. A lot of these people aren't tied to our current needs. I know, I said, but we've gained more than revenue from Altire's fall. We've inherited talent, systems, market share, and a responsibility. We don't get to pretend we didn't benefit. She didn't speak for a long beat. Then finally, it's not just goodwill, is it? No, I said, it's insurance against becoming the very thing we replaced. That landed. She tapped a finger against the spreadsheet, still quiet. Draft the full proposal, she said. I'll take it to the board. 2 weeks later, we launched Operation Reclaim. It started with an internal email, followed by a full-scale announcement on Titan's homepage. We framed it honestly, not as a PR move, but as a declaration of values. We acknowledged where we came from. We named Altire without shame. We told the truth, that innovation can't be built on broken trust, and growth means nothing if it leaves people behind. The response was immediate. Applications surged. Former colleagues reached out, cautiously at first, then with growing enthusiasm. HR ran interviews day and night. My team helped organize res-killing sessions and supply chain tools, cloud platforms, and predictive analytics. We didn't just open doors, we built new ones. Within a month, 61 people had been hired directly. By the end of the quarter, that number reached 112. One afternoon, while walking past the bullpen of our operations team, I spotted a familiar figure at a standing desk, Jason, Altire's former operations manager. He declined my call 3 months earlier. Now, he was mapping a logistics feedback loop on the whiteboard like he'd always belonged. He caught my eye, hesitated, then nodded once. Not as a greeting, as an acknowledgement. We were building something real. Not everyone accepted. Some still carried resentment, anger, the weight of betrayal they couldn't put down. One of them, Patrice from accounting, responded to our offer with a 2-sentence email. Loyalty matters. You forgot that. So did Altire. I read it twice, then saved it in a folder titled Consequences. My own reminder that even the best intentions leave shadows. The media took notice. Titan's ethical reclamation project sets new bar for industry responsibility. From collapse to community. How one company turned retaliation into redemption. But the moment that stuck with me most wasn't in a headline or at a press event. It was a phone call I got from Marlene a week after the program launched. I saw the list, she said, her voice softer now. I didn't expect my name to be on it. You matter, I said. You always did. She didn't say anything for a while. Then, I'm not ready to come back full-time. But maybe consulting. Maybe part-time. Name your terms, I said. The office down the hall from mine is still open. 2 days later, she moved in. Her first team meeting ended with applause. She'd never gotten that at Altire. But at Titan, it was her standard welcome. Looking back, I know now that Operation Reclaim wasn't just about making amends. It was about building the kind of company we all should have had from the start. A place where people's ideas couldn't be stolen. Where silence wasn't the cost of survival. Where loyalty wasn't blind, but earned. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. But it was necessary. Because true leadership isn't about how high you climb. It's about how many people you bring with you. And whether, when given the chance, you choose to rebuild not just your reputation, but the bridge you once had to cross alone. 1 year, almost to the day after I walked out of Altire for the last time, I stood at a podium in front of a ballroom filled with people I never imagined would know my name. The stage lights were warm, almost blinding, and the noise of clinking silverware and polite chatter quieted as the announcer tapped the microphone and said 5 words that still didn't feel real. Industry Leadership Award, Noah Grant. Applause rose as I crossed the stage. Steady, composed, but inside I was walking through ghosts. Every step brought back fragments. The sound of Garrick's laughter, the feel of my cracked leather notebook in my hands, the sterile glow of the Altire cubicle that swallowed a decade of my life. And now I was here. No longer a back office function. No longer a name hidden behind metrics. I had become what I was once told I could never be. Irreplaceable. I looked out over the audience. Executives. Journalists. Titan's full leadership team. My team. But also former colleagues from Altire, now wearing Titan badges. And somewhere near the back, Marlene, seated beside Tessa, both of them watching, both of them proof that transformation doesn't begin with systems. It begins with people. I adjusted the microphone. When I left my old job, I didn't walk out to make a point. I walked out because I had run out of reasons to stay. 12 years of loyalty. Dozens of innovations. A system that saved millions. And I was told I was replaceable. A murmur moved through the room. Quiet, but resonant. Every person in that ballroom had been in my shoes at some point. Or had overlooked someone who had. I was invisible for so long, I started to believe it was a virtue. That staying quiet, staying small, was how you earned respect. I thought my work would speak for itself. But it turns out, work doesn't speak. People do. And if you don't speak for your work, someone else will take the credit. More silence. Deeper now. I didn't set out to bring down a company. I set out to stand up for myself. But what happened next, it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who ever stayed late while someone else got the promotion. Everyone who ever shared an idea in good faith, only to see it presented by someone louder. Everyone who was told loyalty meant staying silent. It doesn't. I paused, took a breath, looked down at the index card I hadn't used once. At Titan, we built something different. Not perfect, not bulletproof, but honest. A place where credit flows with effort, where people matter as much as process, where names aren't lost in fine print. My voice tightened slightly, but I didn't stop. We created Operation Reclaim because it wasn't enough to succeed. We had to look back. We had to make space for the people who'd been caught in the wreckage. Because success without accountability isn't leadership. It's just luck. I looked out over the room one last time. 12 months ago, I was just trying to be heard. Now I know that real success isn't being on this stage. It's knowing that someone else who was once invisible is now building, leading, speaking. That they'll never have to wait 12 years to be recognized. That they'll never again be told they're replaceable. And then, almost without meaning to, my voice softened. I get asked sometimes if I feel bad about what happened to Altair. The answer is complicated. I feel responsible for my actions, for reclaiming what was mine. But I don't feel guilty, because what I did wasn't destruction. It was exposure. I didn't collapse a company. I revealed what was already broken. A final pause. Then, and if we want to build better companies, better teams, better futures, we have to stop asking people to prove they're worthy of respect. We start by giving it. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was something else, steady, deep, honest. Like release. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned and conversations turned to networking and dinner reservations, a young woman approached me near the exit. She looked fresh out of college, nervous, eager, holding a folder so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mr. Grant," she said, "I just got hired into Titan's routing analytics team. First job out of grad school. I watched your talk. I wanted to ask." She hesitated. "How did you know when to stop waiting?" I didn't answer right away. I looked at her face, so familiar because I had seen it in the mirror every day for 12 years. Full of potential. Afraid of being too much. Afraid of not being enough. I said. But one day, I realized that waiting was just permission I was giving other people to keep overlooking me. And I was done giving it. She nodded, her breath catching slightly, then whispered, "Thank you." As she turned to leave, I noticed someone else standing in the far corner of the room. Jared. Thinner. Suit looser. No entourage. No clipboard. Just a man watching from the sidelines of the empire he used to rule. Our eyes met. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just nodded once, acknowledgement, maybe even respect. I nodded back, because in the end, he had lost everything, and I had gained more than I ever thought possible. Not just a new role, not just recognition, but a voice, and the will to use it. For myself, and for everyone who hadn't found theirs yet. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been overlooked, undervalued, or silenced in the places you gave your best to, then you're not alone. But here's the truth. You don't need anyone's permission to be seen. You don't need a title to lead. And you sure as hell don't need to wait 12 years to claim what's already yours. Like this video, if you've ever fought to be recognized, leave a comment and tell us your story, your moment of choosing yourself. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that their value doesn't depend on someone else's approval. Subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your voice, rising from invisibility, and building the future on your terms. Because the most powerful thing you can do, refuse to be replaceable.